What's up, everybody? Welcome to Unit 3 of AP Human Geography, Cultural Patterns and Processes. So to start off, let's just define the word culture. Culture is the shared practices, attitudes, and behaviors in a society. The things that make your culture, whatever your country or your group of people, your citizens, your group of friends, your certain regions of the country, the things that make them what they are their culture. So cultural traits are individual aspects of culture like food preferences or architecture, the way that we use land, our religion, the songs that we listen to, the unique festivals that our area has, those make up our cultural traits. Now, a cultural hearth is the location that a cultural trait originates. For example, if a religion started in the Middle East, like Christianity and Islam and Judaism, if it started in the Middle East, that's its cultural hearth. But it doesn't have to just be a religion. It can be where, like the birthplace of the blues in the South, or it can be where rock and roll started, or it can be where loaded teas got their start. Wherever a cultural trait started, that is its hearth. And then remember that the cultural landscape is the visible imprint of human activity and culture on the landscape. So the way that you build houses, the way that you arrange your cities, all of it points to what your culture is. So like an example of the cultural landscape would be the cathedrals in New Orleans or the shotgun houses in New Orleans. Or a cultural landscape might be something like building your house high for a hurricane. Part of our culture is that our house is on stilts. Or the cultural landscape could be in New York. People live really densely close together, right? It's an urbanized area. That's part of the cultural landscape there. That's part of the culture. If you make jokes, if you have memes, it's likely about the fact that you have to ride the subway every day. It's part of the cultural landscape. Now, when it comes to culture, you can really think in two ways. You can think in terms of ethnocentrism, which is the idea that your culture is sort of better than everyone else's, the evaluation of another culture based on preconception from that person's own culture. Basically, I don't like the fact that you guys don't eat this, or I don't like the fact that you guys do eat this because in my culture we don't do that. Or there's cultural relativism, the idea that a person's beliefs, values, and practices should be understood based on that person's culture. So trying not to judge other people's culture based on your culture. But remember that this is not specific. This does not apply whenever we talk about scripture. We understand that God's holy word is the one and only way to heaven. So this is mostly about like surface level culture stuff whenever I teach you about it. It's not about saying that all religions are the same, but rather trying to understand other people's culture and for our purposes, understanding other people's culture so that we can reach them and help them better understand Jesus Christ. Next up, we've got cultural patterns. Now, cultural patterns are the regional patterns of language, religion, and ethnicity. These all contribute to a sense of place, like the identity of a location or people who live there. Like, for example, the farther up north you travel, the different sorts of slang that you're going to hear. Likely you're going to find less Christians as you travel to different parts of America or different parts of the world. Whenever you come down south, you'll probably meet some more people who are Christian or call themselves Christians. It also enhances place making, like attachment to a specific location as a part of a person's identity, right? This is where we think, oh, you're from here. That likely means that you think this way, or likely means that you do this. This can, in a way, lead to stereotyping, which you have to be careful of. And then also, regional patterns can shape the cultural landscape, a combination of physical and societal features that define a location. Like, for example, if you're traveling up to the very far north, you might find igloos. That's part of the cultural landscape. That's part of what people do to survive, and that's part of who they are as a culture. Now, language, ethnicity, and religion are factors in creating centripetal and centrifugal forces whenever you talk about cultural patterns. Centripetal forces are forces that bring people together. Centrifugal forces are things that divide people or bring them apart. Now, this leads me to cultural diffusion. Cultural diffusion is probably the most important aspect of this culture unit, so let's make sure that we understand it. Cultural diffusion expansion, or what we would call expansion diffusion, spreads on its own. And there are three types of expansion diffusion, and they are probably the most important. First, you've got contagious. It spreads rapidly throughout a population like the flu would. Really, it spreads person to person. This is kind of like word of mouth. It may not be all over the place, but it is in your region and it is popular because people in that region participate in it also. And then there's hierarchical, spread of an idea from a person or region of power and authority. So for example, hierarchical diffusion would be like the influencer diffusion. Someone on YouTube says, you should really do this, and you consider them as being a little bit higher than you, so you listen. Or if a country in the world is really influential, or a president or a leader is really influential, and they say, you should do this, someone who is perceived as being above society, that would be hierarchical diffusion. And then there's stimulus diffusion. Stimulus diffusion kind of takes a change in order to be stimulus diffusion. Basically, when you take an idea from another culture and then change it to match your cultures, and you sort of blend, and it's altered or changed in order to adapt to your specific culture. And then there's relocation diffusion, which is kind of its own category. It spreads as people move and take the trait with them. So if somebody moves from, let's say, Bangladesh, or if somebody moves in from Canada and they bring their culture traits with them, that would be relocation diffusion. Now, the historical causes of diffusion are actually pretty simple. Colonialism, which is the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers, and exploiting it economically. Basically, like going somewhere else and making a settlement there. We don't see this much anymore, but if you think about when other countries used to exert go to other countries and sort of take pieces of it or put settlers there, that's colonialism. Then there's imperialism, a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force. You typically see this done with bigger countries to smaller countries. A lot of times you see this to countries in the Caribbean. Whenever it doesn't happen as much anymore, but this used to be a big thing in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and even before, where big countries tried to get the resources from smaller countries, and in doing so, they spread culture through imperialism. And then trade. Whenever you trade with other countries, and this was especially the case before in history, when you talk about trade, exchanging goods, you meet people from societies that you otherwise wouldn't have, therefore you exchange cultural traits. That is a historical cause of diffusion. So the effects of diffusion on language, whenever you start to diffuse your culture, whenever you start to meet people from other countries, it's going to diffuse language. One of the effects is called lingua franca, a common language that is adopted between speakers whose native language is different. Sort of like a way that we can communicate that might not be either of our language, but it's a way that you and I understand each other. Lingua franca. And then there's pidgin, an unofficial mixture of words and phrases from two different languages that allow speakers to communicate together. And then there's Creole, fully developed language that is a combination of two languages. An example of this is anytime that two cultures come together, a lot of times what will happen is that a fully developed language will form out of the two cultures mixing. Why does culture diffuse now? Those were the historical causes. So what about now? Urbanization, which is the creation and expansion of cities, basically whenever more and more people go into cities, they exchange ideas. And then there's also globalization, expansion of traits and qualities throughout the entire world. And this is especially possible because of the internet and things like social media. And then there's the diffusion of religion and language. And you think about the language tree. So you've got family, branch, group, language, and dialect. And remember that language is going to be what people speak, but then dialect is the way that they speak it, the way that we say y'all in the South, or the way that they say a in Canada. But what about religion though? Remember that there are a few types of religions. First, you've got ethnic religions. Generally, the ethnic religion is going to be found near its hearth. It's going to be found close to where it originated. Generally, it's only going to spread because people move from one area to another and continue to practice their religion there. Then, you can also usually tie an ethnic religion to a certain ethnicity. It doesn't really expand to people outside of it. A great example of an ethnic religion would be Judaism, where typically people who are born, they are Jewish. Not a lot of people convert over to Judaism because it's not what we call universalizing religion. A universalizing religion spreads through relocation and through expansion diffusion. A great example of a universalizing religion that seeks to win converts would be Christianity. We want to tell the entire world about Jesus Christ so that they can know their Father who created them and have a relationship with Him on earth and in heaven. Christianity would be an example of a universalizing religion, as well as Islam, Buddhism, and Sikhism. The ethnic religions would be Hinduism, Judaism, Shintoism, and then other bulk localized religions. Then finally, the effects of diffusion. First, you've got assimilation, the process by which a person's or group's culture is brought to resemble those of another group. That can result in the loss of the normal or the original culture. A great example of this would be Native American society. As America expanded west, natives were expected to assimilate into American society. Then you've got acculturation. This is the culture that comes from blending culture, sort of bringing two things together. Then syncretism, the combining of different, often contradictory beliefs while blending practices of various schools of thought. A great example of this would be in class whenever we saw that like 15% of atheists believe in an afterlife. That would be combining two pretty much contradictory ideas together. And then multiculturalism, the presence of several distinct cultural and or ethnic groups within a society. This is kind of like the American culture where we have a ton of cultures that coexist together, sometimes well, sometimes not as well. But in general, you bring cultures together and they exist side by side, multiculturalism. So that's everything for the culture unit. I know that I went through it extremely fast. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please look at the Google Slides that I'm working off of here and you can get more examples.
1, 2, 3.